studio lately, but yes, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and the Friendly Neighborhood History Studio, where I present historical topics of different weight and background. So hopefully, you guys can think of some topics you'd like me to discuss, questions you'd like me to answer. Tomorrow, I will be focusing on one particular topic, and you can pick that topic by voting exclusively here on YouTube for what you would like me to discuss. And we are joined today by Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, who was put in charge of first the Kingdom of Naples and later the entire Iberian Peninsula. Very famously, Napoleon sought to control Spain and Portugal, and basically threw out their royal families, which the Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil, and put his brother Joseph, pictured here. I believe this is Joseph, or this might be Louis. Louis was put in charge of the Netherlands, and Joseph was put in charge of Spain. So, but a very, very welcome Saturday to all of you. My moderators, Hars and Harry, are here to help hold down the chat and ask questions and bring up important facts and information about the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel that will give you some more details about what we do here. We have memberships available, super chats, all of that great stuff if you want to give and support. We also have a Patreon for extra bonus content and early releases. Members also get early releases and bonus content. And of course, we have long form videos every Monday and Friday here at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we have our live streams, like I mentioned before, Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, where I answer all of your questions. And then tomorrow's live stream lecture, which you can vote on, which will be at 4. But yes. Was Napoleon a proponent of royalty? Was House Bonaparte intended to last a long time? It is kind of interesting that Napoleon, who believed he was the following and the succession of the French Revolution, then tried to create a hereditary empire where his brothers were in charge of certain areas and aspects of his spheres of influence, like Spain and the Netherlands, and he tried to make his son emperor in his stead when he was defeated after Waterloo, and that's where we get Napoleon II from. So Napoleon Bonaparte really didn't have, in many ways, was quite tyrannical, was quite autocratic, and was quite powerful. I mean, he had the gall and the bravery and the courage, whatever you want to call it, to take the crown from the Pope and crown himself Emperor of France and create the first French Empire, which was a step beyond a kingdom in many, many ways. And yet the ideas of the French Revolution, equality, fraternity, and all of that stuff, equality, fraternity, and I always forget the other one. I'm sorry. Were brought by Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes. If you give a super chat, I will go into longer detail on a particular topic. Usually it's a geopolitical topic or a religious topic people want me to discuss because I'm a historian and a social scientist who focuses primarily on history, but I'm willing to focus on peripheral topics that are somewhat related, especially with a donation. But I also go into more depth on a topic if someone is willing to donate, but I'm willing to answer all questions about history and social studies. A gift, not a super chat. Well, I don't know what a gift would do. Gifting memberships always helps. Yes, he was the emperor of the French and of France. So if this is a Q&A, you can ask me anything you'd like about history or social studies, G-Men, and this is what we do every Friday and Saturday. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where for the next hour or so, I'll be answering all of your questions about history and social studies. Kevin. Okay, I think you think my name is Kevin, but that's fair, funny. But sure, go ahead, Hars. We'll see what the topic is. How smart Thomas Cromwell was, and how clever, how was it? He was unable to protect himself in the events that occurred after the end of the Anne of Cleves debacle. So Thomas Cromwell was the advisor to King Henry VIII who helped structure the government after Cardinal Wolsey fell out of favor. Wolsey was eventually imprisoned in the Tower of London, where he died, and met a horrid fate like many of Henry's supporters and closest allies. Cromwell would meet a similar fate. He had been brought up in political power. He was a member of Parliament, and he knew a lot about how Henry's mind worked thanks to his connections to Wolsey. But he basically did everything in his power to give Henry as much power, wealth, and control as Henry wanted, especially over the church. So he's a significant part of a significant mover and shaker in the Act of Supremacy, which put the head of the church in the hands of the king and not the Pope, which is basically the formal separation of the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, from the Roman Catholic Church that occurs in 1534. He also is the one who tells Henry that by stripping the power of the church and the monastic orders, you can actually seize the property and wealth of these orders for yourself and enrich the kingdom, which Henry did. The scouring of the monasteries, what's the word? the destruction of the monastery system throughout the 1530s was Cromwell's idea in order to get Henry wealth and power, and Henry liked it as long as Thomas yes-manned a lot of his operations and ideas. Thomas ran out of favor with the Anne of Cleves affair, which humiliated Henry, where Thomas basically proposed her as his fourth wife after the death of Jane Seymour, and Henry took her, believing that the painting of Hans Holbein, I think it was Holbein, made her look incredibly beautiful. It was either Holbein or Vermeer, or one of the great Dutch Flemish masters of Northern Europe. And basically, he thought that the painting made her look beautiful. When he met her, he found her to be plain. She found him to be fat and unattractive. So the marriage fell apart. Henry was humiliated, and Henry was never one to take blame for his humiliations. So he lobbed it over at her, and he lobbed it over at Cromwell, and Cromwell was summarily fell out of power and executed. So he gambled one too many times. And yes, it was Holbein. The dissolution of the monasteries. There you go. Yes, Ralph, I can speak slower. Do you have a question that I can answer by speaking slower? Yeah, Napoleon was the emperor of France. I don't care about the France versus French thing. He's the emperor of France, which is also full of French people. Why do you dress like a Bond villain? Get a white cat on your lap and stroke it while you say, yes. I love cats. I would love a cat. Donate enough money to the channel, I'll be able to afford a cat, G-Man. But this is my smoking jacket, and it turns me into History Hefner, ready to answer all of your history questions. Sad, in the future, they will be talking about Muslims take over as British history. Well, Muslim takeover of Spain happened in the 8th century, so Great Britain would just be one another country that had that happen. But yes, let's get historical. But if I were to send a gift, could you go on a rant describing how, as much as possible, about the Spanish-American War? Sure, that's a topic I enjoy discussing. I talk about as much as I possibly can in history. I don't know everything, but I talk about as much as I possibly can, Brie. Do you support Marshal Bernadotte turning against Napoleon? I don't know enough about it. I know a little bit about the field marshals. I don't know when exactly that happened, so I can't speak to it. Very sorry to hear about your family. Who am I? Givan? Thank you. Ahmed, hello. You're a beautiful and sweet little angel. I didn't know that you knew that about me, but okay. The topic is anything you would like to ask about history or social studies, which is what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel every Friday and Saturday between 6 and 7 Eastern Standard Time. And liking and subscribing, if you enjoy it, is what it would be very, very helpful. And thank you for the gift, Hars. What's your primary knowledge topic? I focus on all different types of history, but thank you for people who are being very nice and saying nice things about me. I do have a tobacco pipe, but it's in my car right now. Thank you for sending us Sunday. Yes, indeed, 6-7. But basically, Hars is asking me to grant as much as I can about the Spanish-American War, which basically means I'm going to make this a potential topic for the live stream lecture. I think it would be a great topic to do. I think I might have done one in the past about it. I do it every Sunday at 4, but that would be a great topic to lecture on. But basically, the Spanish-American War was America's attempt to become an empire in the fashion of Britain, Germany, and France, who had already built large overseas colonies in Asia, in South America, or not as much in South America, but in Asia and Africa and the Eastern and Western Indies. And so the United States believed it was their time to do that. And in order to become an empire, they needed to defeat an empire. So they targeted the Spanish. The Spanish had been known for their cruel oppression and repression of the natives of areas like of the different natives and Hispanic peoples of Puerto Rico and Cuba for a long, long time, as well as the Philippines, which was in the East Indies on the other side of the world. The United States thought it would be nice to have not only colonies in the Caribbean, but colonies right next to China and a lot of other things. Huge amounts of trade and influence and cultural interaction was going on between the Western and Far Eastern world at that time, and the United States having a colony like the Philippines would be an excellent example of this. So there was moral and humanitarian outrage throughout the United States against the abuses of the Spanish Empire of the civilian populations of these different colonies. Spain had been a dying and declining empire, thanks in part to this man's brother, Napoleon, who had really, really hurt the prestige of the Spanish Empire. It hadn't been able to recover, and it had lost the vast majority of its colonies in what was originally called the New World. However, it still retained Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, the Philippines. But the United States, through the Spanish-American War, would see to the end of that. Basically, on the false premise that the U.S. ship the Maine was sent to protect U.S. interests in Cuba, such as trading and commercial interests, was blown up by a Spanish mine. The United States decided to go to war. It's called a splendid little war. It wasn't so splendid for the Spanish, who lost thousands of men. The United States lost about 200 or 300, and they were able, over the months, to successfully destroy the Spanish. George Dewey in the Philippines launched several major naval campaigns that turned out to be extraordinarily successful. The United States was, at this point, far more industrialized and far more economically prosperous and militarily sound and technologically advanced than the Spanish were, and so the Spanish really didn't stand a chance. The Assistant Secretary of Navy and erstwhile political war hawk who had hungered for war with Spain, a man named Theodore Roosevelt, who had pushed the media narratives. By the way, newspaper and media was a huge driver in what happened. They basically, he basically resigned his cabinet position to lead a team of cavalrymen called the Rough Riders, who would do an extremely good bang-up job of humiliating Spanish forces, such as their daring assault on San Juan Hill. The United States also encountered very little resistance in seizing Puerto Rico from the Spanish, the one territory of the three major prizes that they still control to this day. The idea was to eventually liberate these areas and give them their own independence, but also claim colonial influence and also take one out on the Spanish and also achieve a moral victory. The United States managed to do all of these things. The Spanish Empire was destroyed, and by the end of 1898, Theodore Roosevelt had been elected the governor of New York. Upon his return, he would later use this as a launching pad to become vice president, and when the sitting president, William McKinley, who had hesitated to send the United States to war because of his own experiences in the Civil War, died at an assassin's bullet, Theodore Roosevelt became president and would end up having one of the most consequential legacies in all of American, if not world history. And yes, they took Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That was the one bit of land they got, and they became one of the big major Cuba entered the American sphere of influence as America became one of the big geopolitical powers in deciding the future of the Caribbean. And this is the point where the Western Hemisphere comes under much more American dominance than Spanish dominance, which had been fading, but had been pretty influential in the creation of Hispanic and Latin culture, but also in continual colonial oppression that had lasted until the Spanish-American War liberated their colonies. The United States did not do so well morally when it came to the Filipino question, as Emilio Aguinaldo, who had fought with the Americans, was hoping for independence for his people. The United States deemed the Filipinos to be racially and culturally inferior, and based on social Darwinism and paternalism, determined that they had the right to colonize the islands and teach the inferior Filipinos how to run that. This led to a several years long war where Aguinaldo struggled against the Americans. The United States, under General John Blackjack Pershing, was able to stomp out any resistance, and a man named William Howard Taft, who would later become president, became the governor of the Philippines, handling the military affairs until he became Secretary of War under Theodore Roosevelt. He would eventually succeed Roosevelt and become president, and then eventually mess up his relationship with Roosevelt, and so on and so forth. So there's a quick history and background on the background of the Spanish-American War, one of America's most famous wars, one of its most successful wars. And yes, William McKinley was shot at the Buffalo World Convention on September 6, 1901, and he succumbed to his wounds 8 days later, allowing Theodore Roosevelt to go from being a member of his cabinet just a couple years earlier to being the most powerful man in the world. Probably at that point, you could say the United States is either the most powerful or second most powerful presence in the world next to Britain. But of course, you also have Germany and France running around, and the Russians. So anyways, that's the Spanish-American War. It's part of America's history of colonization. If you want to talk about a war where the United States bullied and colonized and spread its and acted as an imperialistic power, that's probably your best example. That's a better example than some of its other things. But it also showed the United States' ability at restraint to use hegemonic influence in the case of Cuba as a way to imperialize and not just conquer lands and take them like in Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The British and French had been extraordinarily committed to colonization that would involve the seizing of land and putting it into a territorial kitty and bank where they could rely on it to impress their friends and opponents alike. The United States did so more on a hegemonic level, similar to how Great Britain had a huge and heavy colonial influence in China during the 19th century. So there you go. Anyways, I'm sorry. My moderator gave me a gift, and when my moderator gives me a gift like that, I go into a lot of deep detail on a topic, so I have not caught up with the chat at all. But I'm very glad that you are here. If you enjoyed what I've talked about, please like and subscribe. This is a Q&A. I will make sure to get to all of your questions as soon as I possibly can. Which Battle of Vienna? There have been so many battles of Vienna. Are you talking about when King Jan Sobieski and the Polish, at the Poland's greatest moment, perhaps in its power in Europe, were able to liberate Vienna from the Muslims in 1686? The muckraker. So muckrakers were journalists who either exaggerated or made up narratives highlighting the humanitarian suffering of the denizens of the Spanish colonies. And these were men like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, very, very famous Americans who have become legends in American journalism, but through manipulation were able to basically what's called yellow journalism. Were able to shift American minds towards the war. And when you come up with a very, very catchy rhyme like "to hell, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," you get the American public ready to go to war. During the Thomas Cromwell, was there ever a realistic chance that the Pope would have supported or instigated a joint invasion of England by Italy, France? The Holy League being sent against, which was the Catholic League to fight against the Muslims, being sent against the English could have been a possibility had the Ottoman threat not been so pronounced. The Ottomans are surprisingly defeated at Malta in 1565 and again at Lepanto 6 years later. This is all during the time Elizabeth I is running around with her persecution of Catholics being very common in England. The Spanish Habsburgs, Philip II, who had once been the half-brother-in-law of Elizabeth, was determined to reconquer England and turn it into a Spanish colony and a Catholic country. And he had the support and blessing of the Pope. The French were having their own religious wars throughout the 16th century, and they were extremely divided between the Huguenots, which were Calvinist Protestants, and the Catholic Church, and the Medici and Valois royal families, when they eventually compromised by turning a Protestant prince named Henry into the king. He became Catholic, and he signed an edict of toleration that his grandson, Louis XIV, would throw out the window. And you can learn the whole history of this and Louis XIV by voting for that topic tomorrow and coming to the live stream lecture if that gets enough votes. And of course, I have long-form videos about a lot of this. I think I have a long-form video about Elizabeth I, and Hars, if you could put that in the chat, people can go check that out when they are done. The Holy Land belongs to Christ and His Church, not the Jew or the Arab. Thank you so much for sharing your opinion. I don't comment on it one way or another. You have three extremely powerful religions and cultures that all have historical claims to that land. How you figure that out, I have no idea. There are significantly more Muslims living in the Holy Land than there are than Christians, and there are significantly more Jews than either, at least right now. Let me see here. Just passing through. Hope you have a good day. Show people the love you deserve. Well, thank you, Badger. What's your most interesting fact that you know of in historical context? If we're talking about Napoleon's family, it's the fact that he put one of his brothers in charge of the Netherlands and one in charge of Spain. I just find Napoleon to be such a fascinating person, so I'm going to reference him. I'm going through the chat. I promise I'll try to catch up. Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker loved the same woman in college. Bram won her heart, and Oscar held a grudge and left town to become famous. I somehow doubt that Oscar Wilde was in love with a woman, but okay. Spanish-American War led to the Philippines War, kept out of American textbooks. Well, thanks to me, you know about it here. He was shot in Buffalo. Let me see. McKinley would. Who is judicial official? Oh, that's M. He has the M insignia. He's been a long-time friendly neighborhood historian and moderator. It's good to have him here. Thank you for joining us, Kieran from the UK. I cannot speak Tagalog. I do not, but I love Filipino culture. I'd like to learn more history about it. Named after that same Philippines, named the series of islands that were taken by the Spanish after Philip II of Spain. So they're all connected. Where was the bull moose line said? Somebody said that he was fighting like a bull moose in the 1912 election about Theodore Roosevelt. Do you have an evil twin named Unfriendly Future? I do not. But the way I have to talk about the history, the future, and the way people bring up current affairs on this channel just to trigger me usually sends me into my dark Brandon mode. So there's that too. It's not Elvis. It is, I believe it's Louis Bonaparte. Again, I might have been confusing my Joseph and my Louis. Joseph takes over Spain. Louis takes over the Netherlands. Louis is the father of Napoleon III. They are both brothers of what's his name? Napoleon Bonaparte, the one we all know. Now he is called Capo. Oh, yeah, of course he is. Let me see. Did Anne Boleyn really have relations with her brother? It's possible, but no. Was she faithful to Henry? Again, not exactly the whole thing. Henry believed he was cursed by God. He had taken his brother's wife, and that had been Catherine of Aragon. That's why he didn't have a male heir that was healthy. Then he takes Elizabeth, or Anne, the mother of Elizabeth I, and he has his, a relationship with her. But he had an affair with her sister while still married to Catherine before he got to her. So he believed God was punishing him, not for fornication, manipulation, and adultery, but for taking the wife, but for sharing the bed with people, with a woman who had been betrothed to his brother, and with someone who had been his lover's sister at one point. Do you think if the Hernan Cortez and his men had been killed and never heard from again, would the Spanish have sent as many expeditions in South America as they did? Central America, but yes, they would have. They would have gotten there one way or another, but Cortez was disobeying orders from the governor of Cuba, the Spanish governor of Cuba, when he landed in Mexico. Alexander Hamilton? Let me see. I don't know what you're asking, so. Topic is anything you'd like to ask about, Arati. 98% of Israel is not Christian. Yes. There are more Christians in Israel than there are in Gaza or Palestine. No one ever mentions that, and I'm not talking about you, but people come onto this channel all the time and want to talk about that question for some weird reason. Do you think the Levelers had a chance to seize power in the time of the English Civil War? Don't know enough about them to say much. I don't think that anyone other than the Parliament or the King was going to get it. It's not freshly. And yes, M is indeed my IRL friend. Who would win, Napoleon or Ulysses S. Grant? Napoleon. Grant's a great general. Napoleon is better. What did you think of the film Nicholas and Alexandra? You mean from the 1970s? It's okay. I've seen parts of it, not that whole thing. Do you think United States of America is going to try to take over South America next? Sure. The United States basically learned one of the lessons of statecraft with their relationship with Cuba that they used to create hegemonic influence. That creating hegemonic influence means there's far less resources that need to be spent in continually occupying an area. It's kind of a neo-colonization. Can we get some Turkish facts? Turkey was not known as Turkey, or that area was not known as Turkey until the 11th century. It was united by a group of Turks called the Seljuks, which is why it's called Turkey. Before then, it was the crossroads of Asia Minor. I think Turkey's one of the most fascinating and interesting places in the world, separating Europe and the West from the Middle East, being Middle Eastern, but also having some stark reminders of its ancient identities, connections to the Greeks. Troy was obviously in Asia Minor, in Turkey. So there's some Turkish facts for you. Let me see here. Yeah, that is Louis Bonaparte. In your opinion, do you think a country should be united by their similarities or differences? I think a country should be united by their similarities in spite of their differences. Unfriendly history. How much of history is us just guessing and creating our own headcanon? I think the facts are pretty well laid out. It's our interpretation of the facts that's the issue. Well, if you are going there, at least Palestinians revere Jesus and don't believe in a fraud. He is a fraud. I don't think that which Palestinians? Maybe some of them do. There's plenty of Christians in Israel who think that way, if you're going to go that way. Why is the United States going into yet another war now? It's Venezuela. What's your thoughts? It seems like they're going in, therefore, the oil regime change and maybe pressure on Russia. Hey, see, that's the thing. You take away, people immediately are so cynical because of the war in Iraq that it's immediately because of oil. It's immediately because of this or that. Who knows what it's actually for? The ostensible reason is the corruption of the Maduro regime, the drug cartels, continual issues surrounding the traffic of fentanyl, and basically there's this idea that regime change might be good for the area. Now, I'm not saying that I believe any of that. In fact, I'm a historian. I am not qualified to speak on political topics. I only speak on them because people ask a social scientist, i.e. me, about them. Again, if you want my more political analysis, you can give a super chat. But at the end of the day, it might very well be a mix of regime change with a desire to destroy cartels. So there's that. I don't think it's going to happen, by the way. I don't see it lining up that way. I see tensions getting high and then kind of cooling a little bit. How does mod power work? Not sure. Which came first, chicken or the egg? My vote is the rooster. Huh, that was funny. Are you autistic or just a graduate of history Gen Q? I don't know what you mean. I take the autistic thing as a compliment. Autistic people are usually very, very capable of remembering a lot of information and sharing it almost immediately. So there you go. Can you describe the Constantinople went to Istanbul? The Ottomans didn't do that. The Ottomans turned the Hagia Sophia, the famous church of Emperor Justinian, into a mosque, but they still called it Constantinople. It was the Turkish Republic that had been founded by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who renamed it Istanbul in the 1930s. The genocide that befell the Native Americans. Yes, a lot of people have been bringing this up, obviously, in the context of Thanksgiving. The suffering, dispossession, death, and warfare and disease that led to the deaths of millions of Native Americans is absolutely awful, but it's not a genocide. Hypothetical question. If Simon Bolivar's dreams came to fruition, would they be the number one superpower for a long duration due to natural resources, unification, and geographical terrain? Yes, and they were for quite some time in the 20th century. Parthia is interesting. Parthia is extremely fascinating. The Persian Empire that the Romans could never defeat. America is exhausted from the generous support it has provided to Israel in its war of extermination in addition to Ukraine. I don't know if I would call it a war of extermination, but you are correct. The American people are very war-weary, and people in general have become more and more wary of war. Exposure to media, easy access to information, the internet, social media has all amplified this, because now you can see war instead of sitting down at your television, like you could have with Vietnam, which turned a lot of people against that war. Once a night, you can watch stuff live as it's happening on YouTube. Like you can watch me here, obviously, live on YouTube. But yeah. People are very, very war weary. Why do you think more nations didn't have an isolationist stance like Japan did? Was their isolationist success based purely on geographical resources? The Americans for a long time were isolationists. The Qing dynasty was isolationist. Isolationism comes and goes in different areas. Japan is easy for it to be isolated because it is an archipelago with a very, very strong culture, unifying culture, and and especially in the medieval period, an extremely tight feudal social structure that put militarism and service and duty above all other things, and the trace amounts of this cultural phenomenon stretch all the way into the last World War, which I consider to be World War III. But good question. Do you think that the Hagia Sophia being turned into a mosque from a sacred Orthodox church should have happened or left alone? Islam does this. Look at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock is predated by the Second Jewish Temple by at least 1,000 years, and there's no temple, but there is the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, now, of course, that holds significant importance to the history of Islam. Nothing against Islam, but Islam in many places will erect mosques on areas that they destroy. How is the slaughter of 50 million Native Americans not genocide? Just asking, thanks. Slaughter of 50 million. The vast majority of Native Americans who died from disease. 50 million of them were not slaughtered. I'm not making excuses for the dispossession. I'm just saying I don't like the catch-all that we use genocide now for any military conflict where a lot of people die. Because by that scenario, both world wars were full of interwar genocides, aside from, of course, the Holocaust, which happened during the last World War. You can call anything a genocide by this standard. Anytime a lot of people die or are forced to move, or both, during a war, that's a genocide, and that's not necessarily true. Let me see. No, it's not meant as an insult. I just have a hard time being able to recognize other autistic people when it's discussions where someone is very knowledgeable. The line becomes blurred. Well, I appreciate you being here, Lord Voldemort, and I'm sure we're very happy to have anyone here. Where did Prussia start and end? Prussia is northeastern Germany and an area towards Russia that eventually became a very powerful kingdom. And that, of course, eventually was able to unify the German people in the 19th century and become an empire. What history are you versed in? As many as I possibly can be. I'm going to take a sip of coffee because it's starting to cool down too much, but as I suspected, I was right all along. This would be a wonderful time to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Honest thoughts on Bitcoin. If you want a deep analysis, again, Dustin, do a super chat. Bitcoin is interesting. It's good. I think... I think it's just humanity using the technology around them to make money and to make value and to increase or decrease something's value. And they did. And if you think that this didn't happen when paper money was invented by the Song Dynasty in China, watch my video on that. And coinage was the same thing. Coinage was invented so that value could be stored. It's just we're in a digital age, so we're going to do it digitally. But do you think of these places like the Hagia Sophia should have been left alone instead of turning it into a mosque? Well, now it's a museum. I don't know if there are Muslim prayer services there. I'm a Westerner, so I have a Western lens of looking at churches and not wanting them to, especially beautiful churches or beautiful works of art, not wanting them to be turned into something else. I think, but I understand Muslim art and architecture is extraordinarily beautiful, and so no, I would have preferred a mosque. Sorry, not a church, a mosque being built right next to it. I wouldn't have liked that necessarily from a historical perspective. But this is a form of colonization of proof of conquest. And it's also a form, in some ways, of the acknowledgement of the worship of one God that Muslims claim Christians and them do. Plus, I would say that I don't know I don't know what you're saying. Oh, thank you so much, Frog. I appreciate your super chat. Be fair. I'm trying to be fair. Why not genocide? The Continental Army had promised Indian land to its soldier for pay. Land the Indians still occupied. Isn't that displacement of Indians which started the wars? No, that's not what started the war between the British and the Americans. The Americans did dispossess the Native Americans and broke many treaties with them. Yes, there was definitely confusion and mishaps, but not every time a war happens and one side loses, that side is automatically the victim of genocide. And yeah, I mean, just because one side has more victims and loses doesn't mean they're victims of genocide. By that logic, the Nazis were victims of genocide. We were talking about history and social studies. Japan's government officials were split on whether to give up or fight till the very end. The emperor chose to be a coward to stay in power. Yes. Okay. To the person who says Islam is violent, don't forget the Crusades and the Inquisition. There's much to say against Christians. True, Christianity can be extraordinarily violent, and has been. Religion, and that's why I've come up with the basic theory that it's not religion that is violent. It is people that are violent, and religion is just one way they make excuses for their violence. And Islam, Judaism, and Judaism probably doesn't have, and there's going to be people who are laughing at this, Judaism does not have the long-reach imperial power of Christianity and Islam through its history. So Judaism doesn't have as long of a record of violence as Christianity and Islam. Now, I know there are some people in here who think the Jews run everything because you don't know anything about history and you just have to blame someone for the world's problems, so you blame a group of people that are constantly blamed for it. But the truth of the matter is that Judaism does not have a long history of violence that Christianity and Islam do. You are making excuses for your existence. I'm trying not to. But I will say the Crusades are not the military campaign of violence and oppression and pure evil that we think they are. They're more complex than that, as are the jihads of early Islam, the century of conquest of Islam. The Crusades were a response to those. If you want to equal them out and say they are holy campaigns of war, they are the answer to what Islam was doing in the first century of its conquest, as the Christians sought to retake the land taken from them by the Umayyad Abbasids and the Rashidun Caliphate. Did British Empire have a major influence in Japan industrialization, or was more Japanese innovation but Brits helped in some aspects? The Brits helped because they basically made their own little treaty like Commodore Matthew Perry did, and Japan basically decided to open up, industrialize, and become very powerful. Pretty sure it's happening, losing the need for slaves, it's what's happening. I don't know what you mean. I like your wear today, looking spiffy. This is what I would normally wear. What's a good recent example of history repeating itself? Anti-Semitism. That's a great example of history repeating itself. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and anti-Semites somehow always find a way to blame the Jews for all their problems. Can't afford a house in the United States? The Jews. Because the United States gives too much money to Israel. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That's not my job to say. I'm saying that's the argument that's used. The Great Depression has ruined our country. It's the Jews who made us lose the Great War. It's the same nonsense. Japanese industrialization was actually caused by Dutch because Japanese nobles took a liking to Dutch books and writings and science. The Dutch were the only European country allowed from the 17th century to the 19th century in Japanese waters and ports. So when Japan opens up this group of Dutch-loving boys, yep, that sounds about right for the Dutch. Very industrious people. How do you know your sources are accurate, and are you reading alternative historical accounts? I try to look at every possible account, and I've heard various different narratives. I've looked at revisionist narratives. I've looked at updated narratives. I try to look at primary sources. It's a very fair question. I try to take what I know and expand it, and I am very open to being corrected. What about jihad and Sharia laws prescribed by your prophet? Oh, for goodness sakes. Here we go. Who was Adam Smith, and what was his impact to American thought with the Founding Fathers? Adam Smith is a Scottish economist from the 18th century. He's part of what's called the Scottish Renaissance, and he is considered, through his book The Wealth of Nations, published in 1775, to be the founder of modern capitalism, advocating a laissez-faire system where the government was generally not involved in the regulation of the economy, and free trade was a huge one of his principles, where basically the needs of the market would be met as those needs emerge. And an invisible hand was always moving the market to meet the needs of productivity. So basically, in Smith's theories, the market will adjust as needed. It doesn't need outside coercion to adjust because an invisible hand is always moving it. So the needs of the market will be the productivity of the market will meet the needs of the market at all times. Not saying this is not me saying it's right. This is me saying it happened. So when that happened to Jews during World War II, wasn't a genocide then? Give your perspective and the logic. Well, genocide can include the specific targeting of one group of ethnicity in a desire to completely erase them. One class of people, one group of people, the kulaks under Stalin and the Holodomor, the elites under Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge, and of course the undesirables of the Nazi regime, which included not just Jews, but homosexuals, communists, people who were physically and mentally disabled, as well as the Romani gypsies and Slavic peoples. That's why the Holocaust is not 6 million Jews alone. It's about 11 million people, Jewish, Slavic, homosexual, communist, and so on and so forth. Which was the largest battle in the Western Hemisphere, Gettysburg or second battle, Tenochtitlan? I don't know. I think on scale, probably Tenochtitlan. Is that Napoleon behind you? No, it's his brother Louis Bonaparte, who ruled over the Dutch during Napoleon's regime. Wasn't the Crusades a response to the Arab conquest? Yes. Yes, but the difference is modern Christianity is considered to be a pacifist religion, whereas Islam is not. That's not true. Islam in its center is very much pacifistic in many of its forms. The Islam of Malaysia, the Islam of Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, is far different than the Islam we see in Africa and the Middle East, which has more to say about the economic and social factors of those areas than their religious issues. There is a very violent wing of Islam that is extraordinarily literalistic and fundamentalist. Christianity has had that in the past. That's kind of been filtered out. Islam has not had that. Islam had an era of great scientific, philosophical, and technological discovery. It's called the Islamic Golden Age, but that has seemingly stalled in many, many corners of the Islamic world, unfortunately. And the main targets of the radical Muslims are the peaceful Muslims or the moderate Muslims who don't spend enough time condemning radical Islam. And of course, you also have the Sunni-Shia divide. Look up Baal worship. No, I'm not saying that Jewish people were never violent, or Judaism has no violence in its history. I'm saying that Judaism as a religion has not had, the Jews as a people group and a religion have not had the concentrated power to be overwhelmingly violent in imperial fashion like the Christians and the Muslims. Historian, hope your weekend is going well, and chatters enjoy history. Always enjoy your super chats and always enjoy having you here. The First Crusade in 1095 called by Pope Urban II due to Islamic aggression by the Seljuk Turks, expansion into Byzantine territory, and conquest of the Christian holy sites. Yes. And harassment of Christian pilgrims. Not the war between Britain and America, the Indian Wars, which started years before they were reported. Well, the Indian Wars start basically in the early 17th century. You have colonists already struggling with the natives, and it was basically more colonists show up, want more land, and this runs into the natives, which leads to fighting, bloodshed, and land being taken. Yes. I know. I'm very well aware of all of that happening, and I know you are too. Bro, give me your take on the failure of Reconstruction in the South due to the KKK and how it relates to modern times. Let me take a sip of coffee, and then I'll answer that excellent question. Reconstruction probably would have worked if Lincoln hadn't been killed. Lincoln had enough of the support of the radical Republicans in Congress to be able to institute broad sweeping civil rights for African Americans. Whereas he didn't have the baggage of being a racist Southerner like Andrew Johnson. So American history would have been far different, and racial harmony would have been far more achievable if Lincoln had lived. I'm not going to be one of those people who say, well, things just would have worked out the same, or would have been somehow worse when the greatest president of the United States is replaced with an assassin's bullet by one of the worst presidents in American history. That's absolute nonsense. But truth of the matter is, the KKK was the terrorist wing of the ex-Confederate leadership that did everything it could to oppress African Americans and repress their rights. Ulysses S. Grant's presidency did everything they could to stop them, even destroying the Klan. However, they couldn't change the hearts and minds of many of the ex-Confederates. Eventually, President Rutherford Hayes, in a compromise with Democrats in order to win the White House, probably agrees to pardon and give political power to white Southern Democrats. The white Southern Democrats use that as an opportunity to oppress African Americans, which horrifies Hayes, who's absolutely dejected after it, and Reconstruction ends very poorly. So there's a little bit there. So yes. Anyways, MCAFO, behave yourself. You're a moderator. Stop arguing with people. Same thing for Harry. You guys need to stop arguing with the Friendly Neighborhood historians. Can we, friends, discuss historical events in an abstract way separate from religion? Sure. I'm doing it. I just did it. I don't share my religious views. I don't particularly care to do that. I have said before that I believe in a divine being. I think it makes more sense to believe in a God than to not believe in a God, but I don't talk about how personal or impersonal this God is. I have said I'm not a deist, but deism is quite fascinating to me. So, could you talk about the British invasion of Afghanistan? This is actually gloriously Swedish, and I think I've seen you before. It's great to have you back, unless this is your first time, in which case, welcome. This is the topic of my master's thesis, and it's available on my Substack. So one of the social medias that Hars put in the chat is pinned is my Substack, and you can read my articles there. But my master's thesis, I think, is available for premium users, or it might just be available to everybody. But I put it up there because I kept getting asked about it. But I wrote about the British and the Russians. And the British basically defeat the Afghans in a series of wars. Their last one they're not successful at. They're too war-weary after the Great War, and the Afghans get their own independence in the 1920s. But Britain could never control Afghanistan. It was a tribal nation that hadn't become a nation until 1747 under the Pushtun tribe. And they just used the territory, guerrilla warfare, a strong commitment to Islam. Maybe the only unifying thing in Afghan history is their Islamic connection, because it's an extremely tribalistic and spread out people, to maintain to win their full independence and keep the British from controlling everything. The British only ever controlled their foreign affairs. They never could actually colonize them the way they had in India and Pakistan. Fall of Rome is televised now as Fall of USA. Empires fall in similar manner. Good evening from Transylvania. Thank you so much for joining us from Romania. It's so great to have people here. It's not anti-Semitic to call out Israel or Jewish people followers for atrocities that they have been doing or are currently doing. That's calling out everybody. I didn't say it was anti-Semitic. You can call them out. That doesn't make you anti-Semitic. And people who think that, I don't know many people who actually really believe that. There is definitely a critical thinking difference between that and saying that the state of Israel itself is invalid and the people of Israel the Jewish people do not deserve their own state. And you can be anti-Semitic towards Arabs as well, which includes many of the Palestinians. Was General Custer ambushed? No, he was just an idiot. He was trapped, basically, and then ambushed. Let me see. What was the Barbary Wars? The Barbary Wars was one of the first major military conflicts the United States fought, in which they ended centuries of piracy along the northern African coast. They protected American ships, and they defeated this long-standing group of pirates from the northwestern part of Africa that had been assailing ships in the Mediterranean for, again, centuries. Custer, not custard. Thank you, Rodolfo. Religion is the catalyst for most terrorist actions. Most imperialist situation, religion is always a major factor to civilize the so-called savages. Happens throughout history in every country. Yet, except that religion, in the 20th century, proved this more than anything, religion is not the catalyst for that. Power is the catalyst. Imperialism, oppression is the catalyst for human suffering. I think that's a bigger catalyst. And religion is just one vacuum in which one means by which people try to gain power. So, anyways, I'm way behind in the chat. I apologize for that. That's because I had a couple of really deep questions I was going to get to. I will try to catch up. But great to have everybody here. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me see. So what's the history of smoke screens? I don't know. Ask the Wizard of Oz. Let me see here. Did the Moors have slaves? Yes, the Moors had slaves. Almost every civilization had slaves. The answer is almost always going to be yes if you ask me, Odem, Alex, who's had slaves. Let me see. This has just turned into a bash Muslims chat. You guys need to be nicer. The fact that you acknowledge the Holocaust wasn't just about Jews demonstrates that you are a true historian. Yes, of course I am. but it was mainly about the Jews. The Jews were at the apex of Hitlerian and Nazi outrage. Um, but I know enough about history to know that it's not just them. It's also the Slavic peoples and other folks before that. And the Jews, although heavy, heavy, heavy victims of oppression, have oppressed other people. But really, I mean, if you want to look at what's going on in Gaza and you want to say that the Jews have created an apartheid state and they've oppressed the Palestinians, you can do that. But what I find more interesting in that is that when you give people power, oppression can come from that. The Jews did not have their own state in the Levant for 2,000 years, from the time of the Romans until 1,800 years, until 1948. You give people their own land, they're going to oppress the people who they are fighting against. That's kind of just what happened. And it would be the same exact thing if you turn it around. And you know how I know that? Because it has been turned around, where in Christians and Europeans and Muslim Arabs have owned and controlled that land and oppressed the Jews who lived there. That, and the Romans did it too. So it's wherever people are put in charge of something, you can find oppression. And if it happens in Christianity and Judaism and Islam, the Abrahamic religions, you bet it happens in Buddhism and Hinduism. Although Buddhism is a more philosophically peaceful uh, series of beliefs, it's not really even a religion. But Hinduism had these struggles in India, especially with the advent of Islam. So perhaps the big social science lesson is that give anyone power, they can oppress others, and religion has little to do with it. Religion is just the excuse they use. Um, yes, modern Christianity is pacifistic. Let me see here. I didn't know that about Islam. I do know that Saudi Arabia and the UAE don't take in immigrants from certain parts of the Middle East and are most open to the West than most. Yeah, they are, and even by those standards, they're not Western. Egypt is considered one of the more friendly nations to Israel, for instance, or to the West, and Israel is kind of an extension for the West, especially in the eyes of the Muslims of the Middle East. And they sell copies of Mein Kampf in their bookstores, translated into Arabic and English. So, and you can't get Mein Kampf at a bookstore in the United States. Would you say that the Jews would be more violent if they had their own infrastructure? I kind of just answered that. There are many Islamophobes here. The problem is that it's spreading, and despite the haters. Yes, Islam is spreading. The birth rates are pretty indicative of this. Are you racist towards Islam? You can't be racist towards a religion. You'd be racist towards Arabs, and absolutely not. I love all religions, and I love all people groups. I hate violent people, I hate people who destroy things, and I hate people who want power. I don't hate anyone, actually. I just hate those things. What was the political environment of the United States with the Democrats and the Republicans like after Lincoln? The Democrats were politically disenfranchised, but because of the scandals of Ulysses S. Grant's presidency, were able to get back into political power and almost take the White House in 1876. The Democrats had strong support in the South. The North and New England was mainly English, or it was Republican. The world would be a better place without Andrew Johnson having ever been president. True. Do you consider Abraham Lincoln dictator tendencies? No, he's a wartime president. Wartime presidents act like dictators. I'm not a huge fan of FDR. I don't see him as a dictator out and out. Did blacks write the Confederate anthem? I've heard that they might have. I don't know. What do you think the Islamic golden age saw? Why? Why today do radical Islamists want to destroy and deny what their forebears started? When did this eventually switch? They don't see it that way. They see that as a misstep, and that the true Islam and the true desires of the Prophet is the destruction, is the submission to God. And they will fight to the death to prove that. And they will kill people like me for simply drawing a picture of Muhammad, even if I am trying to praise him. Which I find, because I'm too much of a Westerner, to be absolutely abhorrent. But and then of course you throw in all the other far more serious human rights violations against women and gays and things like that. I think it stalled. There was a school of thought that was far more legalistic that won out in the religious tradition. It also stalled because of the Crusades. And the advent of the Turks and then the Mamelukes and the Ayyubids under Saladin, Islam became far more interested in violence and fighting, especially against Christian incursions during the Middle Ages. Do you think Zionists are responsible for labeling the Holocaust a Jewish genocide? I don't think the Zionists are responsible for it nearly as much as you do, especially if you're going to ask a question like that. What is it? What if it is true, if you're rich and a lot of money, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are more willing to take you in? I'm not surprised at all. Qatar does the same thing. Look at all the Hamas leadership who had their families in Qatar because of all the money they've gotten stealing from the UN. I'm sorry, that's just true. Do you ever worry that you're being fed a liberal capitalist version of history? It seems like history has different storytellers. Yes, I'm aware of where I live and where I grew up. I live in a liberal democracy or a democratic republic, and I have a capitalist framework for a lot of the way I live my life. Asking you to donate is very capitalistic and self-interested of me. But I try my absolute best to think about the world from different perspectives and different spheres. Do you believe any of the Romanovs escaped the family executions? None of the ones that were executed, but there are Romanovs who did live on. Anastasia, though, and Alexei couldn't have survived, and they've made this very clear from the excavations they've done of their burial sites. Who was worse, Mao, Stalin, or Hitler? Oh, that's a tough question. They're all, I think, equally bad in different ways. I think Stalin sets up this pattern of communist dictatorships just massacring people because they're the wrong class. The racism of the Nazi regime is unprecedented in human history, and Mao killed far more people than either of them combined. So, but of course he was living in a much bigger country, so there's that too. Victors write the history. Well, I don't know who this victor is, so. Let me see here. Jews aren't the government of Israel. Rich people are the problem. Wealth can also be another conduit by which great and terrible things are accomplished, just like religion. The graveyard of invaders and empires. Yes, that's what Churchill called them about Afghanistan. Let me see here. Afghanistan likes Islam because of inbreeding. I don't think that's true. That's pretty offensive, actually, so it's not true. Do you know much about any wars and colonialism in the Pacific? I just talked about it with the Spanish-American War, good talk. Basically, the United States colonized the Pacific. The Japanese colonized during the last World War, which I consider to be World War III, taking over the Philippines, for instance. Not many people believed, and of course you have Captain Cook settling in areas like Tahiti. I don't think he got to Fiji, and of course the Hawaiian Islands, which were eventually taken over by the United States. What are you wearing? You look like you're dressed for a romantic night. No, it's my smoking jacket. It turns me into History Hefner. Never forget, it was given to me by a very, very dear person in my life, a very important part of the Friendly Neighborhood Historian family. So never forget, I'm not the Friendly Neighborhood Historian, though, glorious, but you could be by subscribing. Never forget Hitler's personal drive who is found out to be 1/8 Jewish, and they had a panic attack. I'm not sure if I think that's a myth that Hitler was Jewish. Israel is guilty of genocide. It's your opinion. Your opinion is wrong, but you can have your opinion. Atheism is also a cause of extremism in many regimes, such as Mao, Stalin, the French Revolution, all of which caused more deaths than any religious war. Exactly. The 20th century proved that it's not religion. It's humans. And religion can be a way to mend that, and religion can be a way to damage that. In Judaism, there's the concept of a mitzvah, which is an act of good done for the sake of doing good, and it repairs the broken sinfulness of the world. No, I am not Jewish. Explain how the Nazi Party can be called National Socialist, yet people still say fascism is wholly right-wing extremism. Fascism is labeled being right-wing mainly because it relies on promotion of traditional values, economic creativity, corporate control over the market, corporatism basically. It usually gets large support. Spain was a good example of this during Franco from the church and the military, which are seen as conservative. So the conservative bastion supported. Obviously, Hindenburg supported Hitler only because he hated communism more. But it is authoritarian, and it proves the horseshoe theory of politics. But it also, I think, in many ways, is left-wing. It was made by a socialist. Mussolini was a socialist, disenfranchised socialist. It's national. It is indeed national socialism. It is socialism fixated on one particular country and one particular ethnicity. And it is militant. It is very much. It pulls from the right, but it does have a connection to the left, to be sure. Apartheid would apply to a foreign people. Jews are from the Middle East. That's true. Poland, almost Muslim-free. Okay. Let me see. History Hefner, not Hugh Hefner, Mark Schwartz. Is this a white supremacy channel? No, it's not, although the chat might confuse you at times. I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't shut down people for having various radical conspiracy theories about the Jews. And I don't shut down people for thinking badly or glazing Islam. I let people share what they want to share, and unless they're actively trying to distract from what I'm trying to do, I basically allow any sort of theory, and I'll engage with any sort of theory, and I like to engage more with the history. But no, this is certainly not a white supremacy channel. I've been accused of many things. I've been accused of being too right-wing and too left-wing, but Also been, but accusing me of being a white supremacist, that's new, especially with everything I've said about Israel. Um, yeah, I'll take the Playboy compliment. The British had a strong hold in Afghanistan despite their independence. They controlled the south. Russians controlled the north. The Russians used the Persians to try to control. It's this competition between Russia and Britain called the Great Game. Let me see here. So forget about the white cat. Grab a top hat of snow bunnies. Well, I've got Simon the Bunny, and he is our friendly neighborhood history honorary Playboy bunny. Should have stayed as a colony, but you like violent history. I don't even know what you're saying. Is Trump a dictator? The U.S. presidents in the last century, more and more so, have become more dictatorial than in the past, and in many, many ways, they would see them as dictators. The founding fathers would. I don't necessarily consider Trump, he's far more dictatorial than many presidents, but I don't necessarily consider him a dictator. I would like to know more about the first Secretary of Treasury of the United States, please. Well, that's Alexander Hamilton, who creates the national banking system while he's Secretary of Treasury by taking on state debts to create the federal deficit. And this allowed him to standardize both commerce and the economy, and being a New Englander with a large amount of interest in the market, this allowed the American economy to explode based on New England and northern mercantile establishments. And he standardized the American currency, standardized the American market, he standardized the American banks, creating the national banks. So Hamilton's legacy is huge. That's why he's on the $10 bill. And I think on the back is the picture of the first bank of the United States, or drawing of it rather. Let me see here. Oh, yes, the Antarctica Treaty. Never met a radical. There are plenty of Muslims who are not radical. Absolutely. The vast majority of Muslims are not radical. Can you do a Candace Owens impression, please? Oh, my goodness gracious. So I've got a Tucker Carlson one that I do sometimes, which is obvious. I mean, everybody around here knows when I do that impression. And if you don't, then you're lying to yourself. Clearly, I mean, it's obvious. You have to shrug and pretend that you are intellectually deep when you're just about as shallow as a kiddie pool. The Ben Shapiro one I did yesterday is because I talk fast. I'm in a competition to see who talks faster. The idea that I talk faster than him is literally ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I can't do a Candace Owens impression because I would just have to start screaming and shouting nonsense. So Zionism was started by a German, what's his name? What was the year? Zionism was started by Theodor Herzl, although it existed before then. It's an ancient idea. It's baked into the Old Testament in some ways, of the Jews having a right to the land of Israel, whatever that means. But Herzl is creates the modern framework for it in the 1890s. And the reason, and I just learned this, the reason that he actually came to the final conclusion that the only Jewish homeland could be in Palestine was because of their ancient land, because of the Alfred Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus was a French officer who was Jewish, who was convicted being a spy and a traitor for the Germans. And he was mainly just targeted because he was Jewish. Emilio Zola stood up for him and wrote the famous journal J'accuse about how he had basically been targeted because he was a Jew, because of anti-Semitism. And Herzl, seeing this, realized that even in civilized democratic Europe, in the Republic of France, liberty, equality, fraternity, those are the three, that even there you couldn't get the fairness that you needed as a Jew. So you needed another place, and that homeland was partially in Palestine. China uses the treaty to build dozens of bases wherever they like. Okay. Genghis was the master of evil. The Mongols were very, very fair and quite open-minded to the people they settled, but extraordinarily cruel to the people they conquered. Do you believe in the biblical flood? It's funny that you should mention that. I'm not going to speak to the truth and historicity of every single biblical event. I will say there are historical events in the Bible. The Bible is full of history. It is written in many ways as a narrative historical book, but there's also plenty of examples of floods in ancient societies, which gives me the impression that something like that might have happened. It's not entirely impossible for it to happen, but many people, many biblical scholars, many Christians, many Jews believe that the events of the flood are a myth, describing the way the world was, teaching a greater lesson about the why rain happens. Ancients didn't understand the water cycle, so they believe that. And I'm not saying that I believe that. I'm saying that's a possible explanation for it. So Abraham Lincoln getting rid of habeas corpus, detaining political opponents without due process is not dictatorial tendencies, using unilateral power going through Congress. Yes, I'm very well aware of what Lincoln did during the war. No, Lincoln was not a dictator. Let me see. An entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars, advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy stuff we don't need. Well, thank you for that very erudite and poetic opinion. What's not to like about FDR? I give him credit for America's economic success after the Great Depression. America didn't have economic success after the Great Depression because of FDR. America had economic success after the Great Depression because of the involvement in the war and the deregulation of the wartime economy after the war. And this is Louis Bonaparte, by the way. You know, when they find whale bones in the desert, you know there must have been sea, possibly. William opened the floodgates, allowing Jews back into the UK. Which William is that? Is that William the Fourth? U.S. history is so limited and boring. Branch out, people. I've branched out a lot, and Harry agrees with you, UK lady. I love English history, and I have an entire series on the British monarchs you can check out. And hello, Auntie. You're just saying that because you're from the UK and you wanted your land and tried to take it, and we still here. Okay, then. Google hereditary disorder. I'm good. I don't have to Google anything you suggest. North Africa CSSA Confederate sailors shore party from CSS Georgia attacked by Turk tribesmen. The CSA's only foreign entanglement. Interesting. I did not know about that. So thank you for sharing that. And with Africans of all people. What a surprise. The Russians were actually extremely supportive of of the United States when it defeated the Confederacy. There's a speech somewhere I can't find. I don't know what your questions about history or social studies. Now I'm trying to catch up with the chat. Did Adam eat the apple or was it Eve and she blamed Adam? According to the story, Eve and Adam both ate it. Like it's real, not actually a joke, the older I get. Okay, modern Jews are from Russia or Central Europe. Real generic Jewish are in Egypt, Palestine, Turkey, or Jordan. Those are the Mizrahim, Sephardic Jews, and yes, they are closer in DNA and ties to that area, but the Jews in Eastern Europe are indeed also Jews. They are Ashkenazi Jews. With the documentary called Europa, I don't know what you're saying. And let me see. Are people just arguing in the chat? I'm just reading argument comments. Do you think we need more air traffic controllers? Probably. Could you please explain the theory of a Democratic-Republican Party switch? Basically, the Democrats have been the party of Jim Crow, segregation, and the Confederacy, as well as the KKK. The Republicans have been the party of civil rights. They were founded in Wisconsin in 1854 to fight against slavery. Hearts, please put the video where I talk about the origins of both political parties in the chat. I think that'll be a good one for everyone to watch. We have long-form content every Monday and Friday, but good talk. In the 1960s, the idea was because Democratic presidents like JFK and Lyndon Johnson pushed forward civil rights legislation and ideas, the Democrats in the South became angry. They were called the Dixiecrats. They stood on the precipice with people like Strom Thurmond and George McGovern and Robert Byrd of supporting supporting segregation, and because the politics changed, because the Democratic Party embraced civil rights, they turned on those Democrats and became Republicans. This did not happen overnight, and it was a thing that spread out over the next couple of decades to where the South became firmly Republican, thanks to the efforts of Nixon and Reagan, and the former Republican areas became heavily Democratic, which is why New England is strongly Democratic today. It's a theory. I don't think it's fully true. Only one of the Democrats from the South became a Republican, and that was Strom Thurmond. Every one of them remained Democrats for the rest of their lives. Even George Wallace did, despite running as a moderate. So, let me see. More history. 109 countries or something like that. Yes. The anti-Semitic question about that, it has the answer. Its answer is anti-Semitism. And the question I get all the time: why were the Jews kicked out of 109 countries? And the biggest answer, not the only, but the biggest, is anti-Semitism. The same anti-Semitism that usually presupposes that question. Yes, the Transjordan was originally supposed to go to the Palestinians. Thoughts on, or the Jews, I forget which one. Thoughts on castratus? They were famous for being at their high voice. Oh yes, I've heard about this. These were young boys who were castrated so they could sing falsetto. Ashkenazi will never get a DNA test. It's illegal in Israel. Okay. There's very little historicity in the Bible. Well, there's plenty that's not historical, and plenty that's not intended to be historical. Jesus' parables are not historical, for instance. But there is plenty that's at least intended to be historical, and I'm not saying that all of it is 100% true, but I'm saying there is a definite amount that actually is true. The Bible points to the Hittite Empire. People believe the Hittites didn't exist, and the Bible was nonsense, and it turned out that the Hittites did in fact exist. Let me see here. And almost all ancient societies have records of some sort of flood or great disaster around the same time when they have no knowledge of each other in communication. They don't believe in the same religion, nothing, but all of them say the same thing about this great disaster. It would make sense that it happened by that logic. The flood myth was found on a Thailand temple 10,000 years ago, centuries before the Bible story. Well, the Bible story might have happened if, at the time, the date of events at that same time. I'm not saying that the Bible story is the one that happened. I'm saying that there's probably evidence of a flood story. The Epic of Gilgamesh has it, the Greeks have it, the Chinese have it in the ancient world, and it might have, I don't know if it's exactly Noah and the Ark, but there is some sort of record of that happening in different civilizations, meaning it probably did happen in some form. You forgot about unions and Social Security. FDR and Eisenhower works are being erased by wartime capitalism. That seems sad. That isn't true. Unions predated both of them. Social Security was indeed invented by FDR and is one of, I think, his better accomplishments. But he wasn't ever intending it to be a long-term and permanent solution to a problem. In fact, he put it in a retirement age of 65 when most people lived into their early 60s. Why are there 13 stripes on the USA flag? To represent the 13 colonies. When I was a kid, my aunt would make mashed potatoes with chopped snails, which was fine, except I became, aphrodisiac. Well, escargot. What do you expect? Jews did not start the slave trade. The slave trade existed in Africa long before Jews were ever there. So, yeah, I've had a mustache before. I've had a beard before. What major political party started in Wisconsin? The Republicans. Jews can make you believe whatever they want. Yes, the Jews are making you donate to my channel. The Jews are making you donate to my channel. Nonsense. Yeah, let me see. The genocide perpetrated against the indigenous people of Australia, 98% of the Aborigines died out. I don't know how much of that has to do with disease. There is an ancient Sumerian flood myth with Monarch and all. How much do you think emerging religions borrow on established myths and history to make their newer religions palatable? It's possible, or just there's different accounts of the same story. How come there's no Bergensteins or Schneiders in the Bible? There's almost no surnames in the Bible. Nonsensical. Let me see here. Let me see. I have a feeling you know who created the Federal Reserve. Is it controlled now or outdated? It's certainly still very relevant. I don't know if it's outdated. What do you think the most unique and surprising thing is about the West? The West does a lot of the same things the East does in the sense of oppression, imperialism, destruction, but because of technological superiority and perhaps even moral views, they do a lot of things that the East has not done. Slavery is still rampant in Africa. The West got rid of slavery. Things like that. So the surprise in history shouldn't be that the West took, the Civil War and all of these things to end slavery, and they did horrible oppression, which they certainly did. It's that they ended these things and turned against them and critiqued themselves over it sooner than any other civilization had done in human history. The Romans, the Greeks, other Western-based civilizations weren't so quick to do that. And certainly not in many civilizations. China doesn't look back on its history of warfare and constantly berate itself over oppression and imperialism that conquered such a huge amount of Asia. The Mongols are not being held responsible for the actions of Genghis Khan. Masons are not. There's more accounts of the existence and crucifixion of Jesus Christ than there of Caesar running Rome. It's not fully true, but yes, there is a lot of evidence that Jesus indeed lived and was killed. Let me see here. Let me see. Yes, the Ashanti in, I believe, Ghana. Do not think that okay, people are just quoting Bible verses now. Let me see. Trying to get through the chat, trying to actually look at Christian, real history questions. Italians are called Guineas, not Irish. Yes, thank you for saying that on a stream. The thing that makes the Western world better is that we place a high value on the lives and rights of others. Sometimes. Why British Empire never tried to colonize Eastern Europe or take over Europe? After Napoleon is defeated, Dwarf Nebula, basically the Europeans agree not to conquer each other, but to colonize and work against each other in colonization for the rest of the century. So colonization is done because Europe is kind of seen as off limits after Napoleon. What is Marx's historical materialism about? The basic idea is that the material world is all that exists, and there is a dialectic between two groups that are competing on a class basis throughout history, and history is moving in an inevitable direction away from the ancient feudalism to a renewed but somehow archaic state of communism. Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that. Hello, Mac. Great to see you. Hello, Norman. Let me see. Will you be making... no. No, I'm too busy. I believe you would sell your soul for way less. Sure. When did the Johannesburg Vikings die out and how? Not sure. Talk about why you think the British giving in to the IRA and then the Irish voting to stay British. I mean, it was kind of just they didn't want more terrorism and fighting. See, Western supremacy is a natural phenomenon. Every nation has its good and bad days. True. Having a fantastic time again as always. Well, history rocks. And history rocks when you're here, Amir. It's great to have you. I doubt they could ever have achieved anything. Anyways, we're actually caught up to the chat, and it took me 70 minutes to get here, but I actually have answered the vast majority of questions. The Holy Roman Empire was pretty hit by the Vikings and the Huns. What do you think of the Jonas Brothers? I don't know. Why haven't you put the videos I've asked you to put in the chat? Democracy, inns, and oligarchy. Thoughts? Could. That's a temptation, but it's certainly possible. Certainly possible. I asked you to put the video on the founding of the Republican and Democratic parties in the chat, and I also asked you to put the video on on Elizabeth I. Continuing a pointless conflict in Northern Ireland and fighting terrorists. That's true. Do you know much about the War of the Roses and the fall of the Tudor dynasty? Well, the Tudor dynasty rose because of the War of the Roses. They were the ones that were victorious with Henry VII and the uniting Lancaster and York and their roses into that. I have an entire video on the War of the Roses, but basically Henry VII, really, really powerful king, really good at taking and holding on to power, underrated in English history to be sure. The Tudors fall when Elizabeth dies, and the Stuart line, her cousin James, comes over and unites England and Scotland, kind of. I put Elizabeth I in the chat an hour ago. Oh, you did? Well, it's been an hour. An hour is a little bit of an exaggeration. Do you know much about Super Mario and Bowser? Yeah, sure. Why aren't you talking about Luigi, though? What are the thoughts about individuals retrieving items at the Titanic? I don't have many thoughts about that. Do you think Dustin Hoffman, or do you think Hoffman was the kidnapper? Don't know. The last battle. It's anti-Semitic because it's truthful will sources. Yes. A man who calls himself so truthful with sources. It's anti-Semitic because it's truthful with sources. Yes, I love that. Oh, my stupid light's giving me a. I just love that logic. It's something is anti-Semitic because it tells the truth by somebody who has the title soldier of the Christ. Christ being the Jewish term for Messiah, the Greek translation of the Jewish word Messiah, because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi who claimed to be the Messiah. I love the way people think or don't. Let me see here. We're going to wrap up in a minute, but I'll take up the last few series of questions. As a person that is into history, looking back, do you see a healthy path for the advancement of humanity as a whole? What would it look like to you? I'm not going to make the Hegelian mistake of believing that humans only progress. I don't think I'm smarter or better or superior to Aristotle. But I think I have more access to information than Aristotle ever could have dreamed of, but that doesn't make me better than Aristotle. Presentism is a horrible thing. Either the presentism where you think you are better than everyone else because they were stupid, or the presentism where you think you were better than everyone else because they were evil. The second one, where you think everyone in the past was evil, is worse and more dangerous because that is the same logic that gets tens of millions of people killed in authoritarian homicidal regimes like Mao's and Stalin's. Can you get the channel a new laptop? I got a new laptop. I'm going to start using it more. You look like that painting. Are you related? No, I am not. I'm not nearly as good looking or powerful or prestigious as Louis Bonaparte. Let me see here. What's LLM? Yes, I'm also confused with that. What are your thoughts about individuals retrieving items at the great valleys of the kings? I think as long as the native country is okay with it and they get to call the shots on how it is done, I think it should be permissible. I think we learned so much because of it. Do you think Hess was making a deal with King George? He wanted to, but they said no. And yes, please contribute to the channel. It is very easy to do. Well, if you were Aristotle, I couldn't understand a word you would be saying because it would be all Greek to me. Hilarious, James. Great to see you. Let me see. I am a know-it-all. Thank you. I'm glad that you admit that I know everything. I know one thing above all other things, and that is that I know nothing. Some say the Roman Empire never died. It just became the Catholic Church, El Vaticano. Yes, some people say that, and some people are wrong. The Catholic Church did not have the political or social power of the Roman Empire. Just didn't. And it didn't have the infrastructural resources or reach of the Roman Empire. Plato's Cave is interesting. It is. Yes, Discord soon. Was the Holocaust fake news? No. No, Patrick, the Holocaust was not fake news. I'm so tired of answering this on that on this channel. Nobody's ancestors came here on wooden paddle boats. The Great Migration happened in the 20s. I don't know what you're referring to. Do you think Chelsea will win a trophy this year? Sure, why not? They've earned it. I read decades ago that King Richard, before being held hostage, herd 150 Hungarian Jews into a wooden temple and set it on fire. Not surprised. Which Richard? Would that be Richard III from the War of the Roses? Do you think the Vatican archives really has all the missing information? I think there's a lot that could be accessed there, so maybe we should dig that up just like the Valley of the Kings. And yes, I'm going to take off. Who invented the Guggenheim press? You mean the printing press? You mean Johannes Gutenberg? I don't know what you're referring to there. When is the Discord? Well, Discord is always on this channel when people ask crazy questions, but I don't know exactly. I have to think of a timetable, but there'll be a lot coming out over the holidays. But yes, please like and subscribe. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much. We went 15 minutes over. Now I've done a combined, should be about 4 hours of streaming this week. You guys can start with my Wednesday live stream lecture on Thanksgiving and then go to Friday. And then, of course, today we've got a lot of questions answered. Really appreciate all of the great questions and support. Consider becoming a member or a super chat on the way out. You get early access and all great stuff. It really, really helps the channel. And thank you, EDG. It's fun, as always, to have you. And EDG has Nicholas I, the Russian Tsar, accompanying his name because he is a member. And yes, we are very cutesy, very demure, and very debonair. And yes, vote for whatever topic you'd like for our live stream lecture tomorrow. I have not. Why didn't you fix the gaping between the upper jaw frontal teeth? I'm working on it. Donate. That'll help me pay for my Invisaligns, which will fix that. And hello, Jack. Let me see here. And yes, a fantastic time. I really appreciate having you all here. I hope you have a very great rest of your night. And we will be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern, for our live stream lecture topic. I don't know what that's going to be, so please vote here on YouTube. Like and subscribe on your way out. Have a great evening. Go out and impress somebody at the club. Maybe meet the love of your life and tell them about some history you learned here. And let me be the one who sets you up. I'll be like one of those dating coaches, except I'll actually be good. But yes, have a great rest of your evening. As I suspected, I was right all along. And as always, love history. Bye-bye now.